Rebuild is something of a four-letter word in the NHL. The previous cup window, despite several attempts to prop it open, has slammed shut and now you gotta deal with the hangover. It sucks, it hurts, but Father Time is undefeated, we all gotta deal with it. Often rebuilds are frustrating, but when the prospects a team accrues through the draft or through trades starts to click together, they generate momentum and usher in a new era for the team. But not all of them are successful. Sometimes they're promising, but you kind of get the inherent understanding that it's just not going to work out and you pull the chute to tank for something better. Just like relationships. So we're going to go through some of those failed rebuilds here. Now, before I get into this, what actually qualifies as a failed rebuild? Well, first of all, I think, for the sake of this video, the concept of a rebuild needs to be properly defined. I would describe it as a conglomerate of 3 or more highly touted prospects in a team's system coming up around the same time, usually through the draft, and usually within 2 seasons. For example, let's take the Penguins' rebuild of the mid-2000s. Within 2 years, Crosby, Malkin, Letang, and Fleury all came up through the pipeline and took the team from missing the playoffs 4 years in a row, to the playoffs, and then to 2 consecutive Stanley Cup Finals appearances, including 1 victory. That is a successful rebuild, so what would I qualify as a failed one? I think it's a multitude of factors, notably games of service dedicated to the rebuilding team, the performance of said players, and the performance of the team as a whole when all the members of the rebuild are at their best. So here's the criteria that I'm going with. First of all, games of service. A team's reliance on their prospect pool is imperative to the success of their rebuild. Putting your faith in your young guns is how you get the young guns to build their confidence to play and instills the fan base the confidence that they'll stick around for a bit. So I would classify the games of service threshold to be 80% of all possible games with a team within the first 5 years for skilled players, or at least 100 starts within that same time span for goaltenders. This is to account for a few factors such as healthy scratches, goalie tandems where the rebuilding guy may have some years behind an insane goalie that's already with the team, potential injuries, and the 2 COVID-shortened seasons in 2020 and 2021, and also the lockout season in 2013. For many, your best ability is your availability. If your young core isn't being depended upon for a significant portion of your rebuild in terms of simply filling out the roster, you're off to a bad start. Second of all, individual performance. If you're going to have your hopes riding on the young guns, they better be able to produce for you. It can be a bit frustrating when they just don't. Either they end up being very streaky, or they're forced into lower usage roles due to veteran stopgaps. As a result, the culmination of skill position players must combine for at least 0.66 points per game, and goalies must produce at least a 900 save percentage. Theoretically, if they're as good as advertised, 54 points in 82 games shouldn't be too much to ask for up-and-coming prospects. If not, well, what's to be excited about your future? Lastly, team success. I don't think it's enough to simply make the playoffs anymore. There are several rebuilds on here that made the playoffs, and it hasn't been enough. You have to actually do something in them. So as a result, we're doing skateboard rules, 2 to make it true. For a rebuild to be successful, you have to have won 2 playoff series in the first 5 years. If your youth has given you such momentum, surely they'd be able to manifest that into more than just one potentially fluky playoff win. Now, not all the teams discussed in this video will fail to meet all of these criteria, but they will mostly, at the very least, fail to meet one of those criteria, with many also falling into 2 or even all 3. Sometimes they will exceed all those criteria and still be failures, at which point their reason for inclusion will be explained. Rebuilds can fail in so many different ways, and sometimes the answer just ends up being a vibe check of, did this move the needle for the team? So we're going to be going through a recent history of rebuilds that definitively did not, going as far back as 2010. There are some interesting ones, you'd be surprised to find out. Also, even though trades and free agent signings are parts of rebuilds, rebuilds always, in my opinion, start in homegrown talent. So while we will be discussing the trades and signings that bolstered any given rebuild, the core that I'm working with here are all draft picks of teams that I'm talking about. We'll get into the broader scope of the rebuilds in each individual segment, don't worry. And before I get into this, I just want to say that, as always, these videos are 100% made by myself without the aid of AI or anyone else. I write, record, edit, and produce everything on my own. This is a one-person operation. So if you want to uplift the integrity of quality sports content on YouTube and support small creators, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Now it's time to discuss these teams' descents into madness. Yeah, this might be a bit of hometown bias, but we're starting off with a look at the Bruins and their failed rebuild during the past few years. Ever since the retirement of Bergeron and Krejci after a game that shall go unrecognized, The Bruins have been slowly starting to build up a bit of a nest egg of prospects. However, it's important to also recognize the failure of the rebuild they'd been attempting for the past few years leading up to this. Beecher admittedly did not have much of an upside. A few okay seasons in Michigan relegated him to topping out at third line winger at the absolute best. Granted, I loved watching him play, and it kind of started as an inside joke with Short Shift Podcast about Beecher 1C, but that's my own silliness, that's not related to him. Lysell, on the other hand, was a top 10 talent that fell all the way to 21, with offensive talent that would be top 6 caliber anywhere but especially in Boston, where there was no one faster than him on the ice. Lorai's offensive upside made him a strong two-way candidate that Boston needed on the blue line. And then there was Patra, an organization starved for center talent beyond Bergeron and Krejci. Patra was the light in the darkness with a solid mobility and an amazing ice vision, despite maybe being a little bit undersized. Opening night in 2023 was when they'd get their first shot together. Beecher and Patra both in, with Patra getting his first point and Beecher getting in his first fight. Everything about this looked to be the start of a burgeoning core from the team, especially with Lorai making his debut that following month. And then Patra got hurt. And then we didn't see Lysell. And almost 3 years later, everything has kind of blown up. Has this core had some really nice moments? Of course, especially Beecher and Lorai. Beecher had the first goal in the series against Toronto, and Lorai had an amazing poke check that led to a JVR goal at the start of Game 4 in that series as well. But afterwards, ooh, I'm dying. Beecher earlier this season got waived and got picked up by Calgary. I'm gonna miss him. Patra has been perpetually a taxi squad guy, shuffled to and from the AHL with the hope that he will manage to bulk up and not be so injury prone. Talent is there, physicality is not. Lorai has been the best member of this core by a pretty significant margin, which sadly isn't saying much. Despite being the only member of the core currently on the Boston Bruins active roster and having posted a pretty respectable 33-point campaign last year, a minus 43 is bad. The word you're looking for is bad. That said, he's done a lot better than the last member, Lysell. Now, hilariously enough, I have a video in the works about him right now trying to assess who is to blame for his stalled development. He was a prospect I wanted to succeed with all my heart, but it seems like he is Boston's answer to Pierre-Luc Dubois. He has tremendous offensive upside if only we can give him to give even the slightest bit of a shit about the game. But at the same time, the Bruins development staff has plenty of problems with their chasing of a certain model that I'm sure they're going to try to squeeze Dean Letourneau, Will Zellers, James Higgins, and maybe even Vasek Lenar into. But what should have been an amazing supplemental cast turning into a complete swing and a miss. The more that I think about this rebuild, the more pissed I am at it. How have you not won a playoff round since winning the Cup with a roster this good on paper? I know this team has had some issues after the departures of Marian Gaborik and Justin Williams, and tried to keep some of the gang around for way too long, looking squarely at Drew Doughty and Dustin Brown, but man, this is bleak. Quinton Byfield has top-line center potential. His hockey sense combines very, very well with his power forward frame. Alex Turcotte has the speed and energy to facilitate offensive zone entries like crazy. Alex Laferriere, while being a really good playmaker, also has one of the best shots that the Kings have ever seen. As for Brandt Clarke, he has the potential for Norris caliber play, and I'm not joking. His defense is incredible and has the offensive upside to contend with the best of them. If there were any time for the Kings to assert themselves as a young upstart team ready to take over the league, what better time than now? Their youth is blossoming and can provide useful aid to Adrian Kempe and Old Man Kopitar while also possessing the skill to fully take over eventually. To borrow a bit from a certain Yinzer, only a brick wall can stop you. Its name is the Oilers. And the Oilers again. And again. And one more time for good measure. While all of these players are still on the team, the Kings have never been good at the whole making adjustments thing. Byfield has been able to make some progress, but is still looking for his fifth gear. And it really pisses me off that he's still unable to crack 60 points in a season this far into his career. Laferriere has been able to flash his sniper of a shot at some points, but man is he streakier than shitty windshield wipers. Several long stints where he can't get anything going. Clarke may be the best upside player from this rebuild. I'm serious when I say he's Norris caliber. The only issue is he can't play 60 minutes a night, and the rest of the defense is... well, Cody Ceci is on their roster. I don't think I need to say much more than that. And then there's Turcotte. Usually this insane speed would be able to get him some decent offensive momentum. Nope. Turcotte is, very unfortunately, a third-line forward who somehow, through the power of name recognition and a weak draft whose first-round talents have been very scattershot, managed to sneak his way up to a top 5 selection. Family bloodline seemed very on brand for Kings, but make no mistake, these fellas are no royalty. Now, this is an interesting one and maybe even a hot take. Yes, with all due consideration, the Rangers have done pretty well for themselves in the past few years. 2 trips to the Eastern Conference Finals, and Shesty even won the Vezina in 2022. How is this fucked up? Well, consider what has happened with the Rangers since Chris Kreider left, amplified by the trading of Panarin. This core was, to put it lightly, poorly cobbled together. Shesterkin was easily the best piece, 4th rounder in 2014, drafted to be their heir apparent to King Henry, and like all goaltenders, took a while to get into the league. Keandre Miller as a D-man had a strong two-way game that would place him as a solid second-pair defenseman on any roster, potentially even top pair. Well worth a first-round pick. Kakko was touted as the power forward for the future with enough net front presence to score some greasy goals. Exactly what you want from someone of that archetype. Strong, wins corner battles, and can still pick up 40 to 50 points a season. With a second overall pick though, I don't know. But then we get to Lafreniere. A piece that everyone got pissed about a month before the Rangers drafted him because it was during COVID year, and no matter what, no one will ever be able to tell me how that lottery worked in any way that I can understand. But regardless, Lafreniere was rated similarly to Kakko, but with a higher ceiling and a better shot. Good puck handling, plays well through contact, a forward's forward. And for a while, the play was alright. Hell, in the first full season of everyone being a regular contributor to the active lineup, they did okay for themselves. Topping out at 21 points among them was Lafreniere isn't exactly what you want to see from a first overall pick, but hey, the core was young, the season was shortened due to COVID, and they were playing behind Panarin, Zibanejad, and Kreider. However, one thing became evident throughout the next few years. They grew stagnant. It seemed like Laffy and Kakko were relegated to the third line with Will Cooley to be the momentum conglomerate that the third line usually is, keeping up pressure in the offensive zone while the top 2 lines catch their breath a little. None of them moved the needle all that much, except for Miller and Shesterkin. And so, the Rangers pulled the chute. Kakko was traded to the Kraken to add even more Ks to that team. Try saying Kraken's Capo Kakko 5 times fast, I dare you. And what they got was a pittance of his initial draft value, being Will Borgen a 3rd and a 6th. Miller, one of the only 2 players that was a consistent standout, was sent off to Carolina for Scott Morrow, a 2nd, and a conditional 1st that I cannot find the condition for anywhere. I swear to God, I have been looking for a month at this point. Shesterkin is still in the Big Apple, however, and he's an amazing 10D. Lafreniere is working his way up to the second line, albeit as a winger. And as we see this season, it's evident the Rangers are taking a full nosedive. Expect them to start a new rebuild sometime soon, and for everyone to want James Dolan dead for the 40 trillionth time. Of all the rebuilds today, I think this has some of the most potential to right the ship. I mean, hell, they've played over 80% of possible games and have over 0.66 points per game, right? So why am I talking about this? Well, you ever notice how little this actually moved the needle for New Jersey? This is a team that has only won a single playoff round since losing the Cup Finals to the Kings in 2012, which, fittingly, was the end of the last big Devils group. Patrick Elias was at the end of his career. Peter Sikora was at the end of his career. Martin Brodeur was at the end of his career. Ilya Kovalchuk was going back to Russia. Zach Parise was swept up in Minnesota's big power grab. And it began 11 years of no second-round hopes. That was until these guys showed up. He sure was the prize of 2017. No one really expected the Devils to sweep up the top spot after the Avs had the absolute worst season in recent history, but they did. Natural-born leader and one of the best two-way forwards in the league. It was hard to draft him and not immediately slap the C on the kid. Mercer was a similarly strong 200-foot player that could either play wing or center if needed. Bront was a surprise standout, having gone from a 6th-round near nobody to a monster with insane work ethic and attracting the attention of genuinely the dumbest Devils fan I've ever had the displeasure of interacting with. And then the Hughes brothers. Jack is one of the best playmakers in the entire NHL. I mean, shit, we kind of saw that with the Olympics. Speed, ice vision, shot capabilities, the whole 9 yards. Luke, while not hitting the highs of his brother Quinn, he's still a hell of an offensive playmaker who can facilitate amazing blue line play. So with all this talent and all of them still in New Jersey, why is this here? Well, look at them. They're usually the only players to do anything on the team. A team with goaltending more inconsistent than a drunkard's bowel movements. A team as deep as a flesh wound. And just like that flesh wound, they hurt all over. Jack and Luke were out long-term earlier this season. Timo Meier's been hurt. Markstrom was dealing with lower body injuries earlier this season. This is a killer rebuild that should theoretically have Cup Finals ambitions. But due to Tom Fitzgerald being one of the worst hockey executives in the entire sport, it's instead relegated to the bottom of the Metro. I'd say they can try to move some pieces to bolster the depth, but these guys are going to be wasting on this team due to everyone else being given a no movement clause. It's like everyone always says, fuck New Jersey. You know, I did kind of think for a second that this was going to be something big. Anaheim has always been a fun and frenetic offense to watch, and having the kid with quite possibly the most swagger in the entire NHL was something to behold for a second. Zegras was an amazing prospect, with an eye for plays some people wouldn't even begin to imagine. Remember the frickin' dish again? No matter where he was in the top 9, he was sure to be a guy you knew was on the ice. Perreault was a nifty little snag for the Ducks as thanks for taking on the David Backes contract from the Bruins. Someone who might have needed a little bit of work done, but could be molded into a surefire sniper to terrorize the West Coast like never before. Drysdale was a hell of a shutdown defenseman, someone whose abilities would complement Cam Fowler on the blue line, which they desperately needed help with. Dostal was someone people kind of expected to stay in the tank for a little bit, but made himself known very early on. As John Gibson was aging and getting shelled by a mediocre defense the Ducks had, and still kind of have to some degree, Dostal emerged as a quality option as a backup to take on 35 games a season or so. To start, things were very interesting. The Ducks were still awful for a while, no doubt about that, but that doesn't mean they weren't fun. As previously mentioned, Zegras brought so much fun to the roster and made it quite possibly the most watchable train wreck on their side of the Mississippi. But eventually it all gave out. Questions emerged about the work ethic of pretty much everyone in the core. Zegras was too busy aura farming to actually be a reliable forward. Drysdale was constantly being shelled with injuries and his availability was coming into question, especially with better young talents like Pavel Mintyukov and Jackson Lacombe nipping at his tail. Dostal admittedly dodged a lot of the criticism because he was legitimately doing the best job of anyone on the entirety of Anaheim Ducks on most nights he was in. But then Jacob Perreault. Inconsistency, questionable work ethic, injuries, everything you don't want to hear from a prospect's development timeline. And so, Anaheim hit the fuck it button. Drysdale was shipped off to Philadelphia for the rights to Cutter Gauthier, with Zegras following him soon afterwards. Perreault has, to this day, only played one singular game in the NHL in his career and is currently on the Providence Bruins. Dostal, on the other hand, has remained in Anaheim as the successor to the starting goalie role that Gibson left behind for him, farming nothing but aura and getting iced over and wilting when it mattered most. I know I just finished making a video about the Leafs and how frustrating they are. Thank you all so much for the support for that video, by the way. You got over 25,000 views in less than a week. That is insane. But I don't think they get the crown for the most frustrating franchise in the NHL. That distinction goes to the Vancouver Canucks. It's kind of funny that you can watch in real time the exact moment that the Canucks lost their way. And right here. Yaron Rome hit. Ever since then, what has this franchise done? In any case, with the Sedin twins nearing the end of their careers, Jim Benning had his work cut out for him in rebuilding the team. Pettersson was an incredible momentum bringer whose 200-foot play and wrist shot were attributes any GM would kill for. Horvat had quite possibly the most complete second-line center package in the entire league. Wins faceoffs, has consistent scoring, and is one of the best vocal leaders in the entire National Hockey League. Besser was a high upside get in 2015, as one of the premier power play guys and amazing hockey IQ who can find the small but exploitable weaknesses in any defense. Quinn Hughes, strong argument to be made as a top 3 defenseman in the entire NHL for the sole reason that he provides elite support at the blue line and can actually play defense. Thatcher Demko's insane glove hand, rebound control, and mobility may be some of the best in the entire game. So how did this turn out? Awful. It turned out awful. Jim Benning, being the willing yes man of Francesco Aquilini, the only owner that can give Terry Pegula a run for his money and loathsome meddling, decided time and time again to throw away any semblance of sensible team building into the ocean. Yeah, let's get JT Miller and prioritize a locker room cancer who has the offensive upside of maybe the 3rd best forward on the team over the guy who's been our captain for almost a decade. Let's take on the horrendous contract of Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Let's trade our best goalie prospect for a guy who's only ever going to be a fourth-line grinder, as was shown in Boston. For a team with this much talent on it, Aquilini's meddling and Benning being an idiot savant killed any momentum the team could gather. For the better part of half a decade, the main conversation surrounding the Canucks has been, will this be the year that they trade everyone? That's not conducive to a productive rebuild. They've already done it to Horvat, sending him off the Islanders for a few bottom six options and a pack of peanuts, and they just did it to Hughes, getting a decent haul but nothing that'll move the needle like he did. A big all-in push that ended up pushing them off the cliff. Now, believe it or not, this was actually going to be the first video essay I ever made. I remember writing a vague script about this back in 2023 before trashing it. Now, admittedly, you can be forgiven for forgetting this even happened. Chicago was dealing with other major issues at that point, I'm sure you're all aware. But this was the new core expected to strut onto the stage and pick up where Kane, Taves, Seabrook, and Keith left off. Hagel has always been a scrapper. Amazing piece to a middle six who can play through contact like nobody's business. Doc was more of a two-way forward who was able to stretch the ice with an amazing 200-foot game. DeBrincat, bona fide goal scorer. Wherever he was on the ice, he was always liable to put the biscuit in the friggin' basket. As for Boqvist, he wasn't really meant to carry a defense through thick and thin, but a solid blue line support that could slot into the team's bottom four. Maybe he wasn't going to take over where Seabrook and Keith ended, but he was supposed to do enough as a stopgap. And then, it all happened. The Blackhawks became awful. Awful as an organization, and awful as a team. While the front office was fielding derision for disgusting behavior allowed to fester throughout the 2010s, behavior that Kane participated in, the team was fielding the harsh reality that nothing was ever going to be enough for that core to actually get over the hump. And so, they stripped the team down to the studs. Boqvist was shipped off to Columbus for Seth Jones in a deal that hamstrung the organization and ruined the offseason for every other team trying to sign a defenseman. Doc, Hagel, and DeBrincat all managed to snag Chicago some very strong draft capital, with all of them fetching at least one first-round pick from Montreal, Tampa, and Ottawa respectively. While all of them were producing as expected, with maybe the only disappointment being Boqvist, they turned this rebuild into yet another. And with the current Blackhawks squad being better but still not able to assert themselves amongst a murderer's row of a central division, it seems the more things change, the more things stay the same. Oh, I knew I couldn't get away from talking about these guys. You all made my retrospective on the Leafs in the 21st century so big, I had to come back to the core four one more time like I'm Daft Punk. We all know the story at this point. I mean, how could we not? For your sake, I'll keep it short. Matthews is the franchise savior with a shot that people haven't seen since Matt Sundin. Mitch Marner has some of the best momentum in the game and a sneakily good 200-foot game. Nylander is always sneakily a really good goal scorer, and it's a miracle he hasn't gotten a fucking all-star game at this point. And Riley, well, he was honestly topping out as a second-pair defenseman who was forced to play first-line minutes, but he gets grouped in because of the reason this all fell apart. The team spent so much money on these guys and John Tavares that they had no money to spend on anyone else. They kept performing well enough that they weren't getting any standout prospects in the draft, and the team falls apart at any adversity. You got it? Good. Let's keep going. Late 2000s Sabres. They were a sight to behold, weren't they? Jochen Hecht, Danny Briere, Thomas frickin' Vanek. It was a shame that core never got past the conference finals. And then it came time to tear it all down. And in that, they got 3 strong prospects to hopefully be the light at the end of a very dark tunnel for them. As Buffalo was starting to forget what a postseason even was, both in football and in hockey. First up was Rasmus Ristolainen, a defenseman with a strong offensive upside and big physicality. Primed to be scooped up by a team that had at that point devolved into having a ChatGPT generated offense. And Sam Reinhart's nifty goal scoring touch was primed to mesh with Jack Eichel's playmaking prowess like mangoes and chili peppers. Ullmark, absolute unit in net, at 6'4" and having a blocker hand rivaled by few. For the first time in what felt like forever, Buffalo was going to go wild. With the youth assembled alongside Evander Kane and Ryan O'Reilly, the sky's the limit with them. Turns out the actual limit was the middle of the pack. Buffalo would go on to not make the playoffs once with this core, as they're currently in the midst of 16 consecutive seasons without seeing the postseason once. Hell, during these years, they'd finished no higher than 6th in the Atlantic. and it was due to a bunch of different factors, but most notably is the meddling of Terry Pegula. Dumping head coaches and general managers like they're YouTubers getting caught in crypto rackets, and eventually trying to make his wife the president of hockey operations is not the framework for a competent organization. And it wore on everyone. No one was happy. Everyone wanted out, and it showed on the ice with an 18-game losing streak at one point. First shoe to fall was O'Reilly, when he lost his love of the game and got traded for a haul that included Tage Thompson and very little else. But of the development core, Risto was shipped off first to Philly for a massive overpayment. He's been mediocre ever since. Oh, Mark signed with Boston and willy-nilly put together a top 10 season in goaltending ever. Reinhardt's talents were shipped off to Florida for Devin Levi in a first, and I wonder how that worked out for him. And lastly, Eichel. The one most vocal about his frustrations with the team got shipped off to Vegas for Alex Tuch and Peyton Krebs and a few picks, and I wonder how that worked out for him. Unless Buffalo gets back to the playoffs with this current core they have of Owen Power, Rasmus Dahlin, Tage Thompson, Alex Tuch, and others, they'll continue to have the stench of this failure on them. Hold on, I gotta take this. Hello? Wait, what? They won the division? What the fuck? And our final stop on this insane tour of bad rebuilds brings us to the early 2010s Edmonton Oilers. After getting bonanza'd in 06, they went into quite the deep crater, not making the playoffs once in the span of a decade, and bottoming out early in the 2010s, with 3 consecutive first overall picks. Taylor Hall was the playmaker of the future, a killer through the neutral zone and would make defenses shudder at the thought of him screaming into their domain. Jordan Eberle was an amazing two-way playmaker with enough hockey sense and scoring talent to accept first-line minutes, but would eventually be usurped by Ryan Nugent-Hopkins doing everything he did but even better. Oscar Klefbom was the prototype for a strong two-way defenseman that could actually play defense. Dubnyk was a late bloomer, having been taken all the way back in 2004, but was a brick wall in net. Didn't go very many places, but at 6'6", 224, who needed to? And then the prize piece, the one to catapult the Oilers into legitimate contention. Nail Yakupov, with his blistering speed and a shot that many feared. Surely they'd emerge as the actual contenders out of Alberta, right? Left! While of them were independently talented, they weren't exactly meshing with the rest of the team like Sam Gagner, Sean Horkoff, and Jeff Petrie. Outscoring them? Yes, but the team wasn't coming together like they'd imagined. Not to mention the prevailing issue with Oilers hockey for the longest time. Poor asset management. Devin Dubnyk is a strong upstart young goalie that can absolutely take over for Nikolai Khabibulin. Let's trade him for a bottom 6 winger. Taylor Hall is a strong forward who can easily take over the league if he wanted to, but we have no good defensemen besides Klefbom. Let's trade him 1-for-1 with New Jersey for Adam Larson. What the hell? And speaking of Klefbom, what the hell is that dude's issue? Stop getting injured. Come back already. And this Jordan Eberle dude? Sorry, I think you mean Ryan Strome. Nuge, you're doing okay as is. You stay put. Unlike you, Nail. Now, I think we can forgive not having this information be brought to light until Brian Burke spilled the beans on Chicklets that one time, but this may have been the biggest disparity in a player's talent and competitive drive ever. When your draft interview is so bad and so nonchalant that a scout nearly fights you right then and there, you're going to be gone in a few years, no matter how many points you can put up. Spoiler alert, he didn't. He far and away was one of the worst players on the Oilers night in and night out, putting up back-to-back -30 seasons or worse. The goal scoring never showed up. The hockey sense never showed up. He never showed up. My next bottle of liquor never showed up. And the Oilers as a whole never showed up. And that, my friends, is how you throw 3 consecutive first overall picks into a death trap. So this was a fun romp, wasn't it? Teams can sometimes shit the bed on developing talent. They may try to develop the wrong talent, or they may try to develop talent that just doesn't work together. There are a million different reasons why a rebuild may not work. But I invite you to look at what happened to many of these teams after their rebuilds didn't work. You'd be surprised at how many times they bottomed out again and then got it right the second time. Going down the line, the Bruins now have a future with James Hagan, Dean Letourneau, and Will Zellers. The Ducks are going to make Leo Carlsson, Beckett Seneca, and Cutter Gauthier everyone else's problem. The Blackhawks finally have life again with Connor Bedard, Frank Nazar, and Artyom Levshunov. The Sabres, with their current core, are firmly in a playoff spot for the first time in a decade and a half. The Oilers, immediately after that experiment died, they got Draisaitl, McDavid, Bouchard, they still have Nugent-Hopkins. It's insane how they made the finals twice in a row and couldn't win. And while none of them have won it all yet, it's a testament to how maybe changing your philosophy and direction may be what's best for you. Don't get pigeonholed into doing things the way that you think they ought to be. Do them the way that best benefits you. Much like these athletes' careers, our lives are too short to not take that much agency for ourselves. Kraken's Capo Caco, 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 Kraken's...